Hey, everybody, welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. We're in December. We're getting to Christmas time, and I wanted to put a little bit of focus on some Christmassy movies. So today we're going to take a look at a movie called Cover Up, which from the look of the poster doesn't look very Christmassy. And in truth, this is probably one of those a little bit more Christmas adjacent movies, like a Die Hard, rather than a true Christmas movie like, say, White Christmas or It's a Wonderful Life. It's one that I kind of found almost at random, popped up on Tubi. Every once in a while, I like to hit something to just watch it sort of sight unseen. I have no idea what I'm heading into. I did see, on the little cover that they had Dennis O'Keefe. I knew I liked him. So what the heck? Let's give it a try. So it's an interesting film. It is a crime film on one level, but there's some light comedy. There's a little bit of a romance, and they do a really nice job in the film of blending those things. And rather than them detracting from one another, kind of actually, I think, bolstering one another a bit. The film was directed by Alfred E. Green. Came out in 1949. Now this is a guy who started directing in 1916. He directed tons of movies, including, and I should say most of them not like the big stuff that you've heard of. This was a real working director. He did do the Gracie Allen murder case. If you're into old time radio and old TV, and frankly, if you're just into comedy, you know who Gracie Allen is. Did the Jackie Robinson story as well. Movies written by Jerome Odium Dennis O'Keefe, who wrote under a different name, with some additional dialogue by Francis Swan and Lawrence Kimball. Now, Odium, really interesting guy. He did time for forgery. Getting out of prison, he becomes a reporter, works his way up to being the managing editor of the Minneapolis News. Eventually writes a novel, goes into screenwriting in 1939. So, when you talk about people making movies who don't have any practical experience of life, Jerome Odium is not one of those guys. This dude lived a life. And Swan, playwright, novelist, screenwriter, and I just found it interesting, he was an early writer for the Dark Shadows Gothic soap opera that I enjoy. The cinematographer, Ernest Laszlo, man, this dude does a ton of movies, including Road to Rio, DOA, Stalag 17, Kiss Me Deadly, Attack of the Puppet People. The guy had range. And then he gets Academy Award nominations as he goes for Inherit the Wind, Judgment at Nuremberg, It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, Ship of Fools, and he won for that one, Fantastic Voyage, Star, and for Logan's Run. So, now this movie, cinematography-wise, is fine. It's not like groundbreaking or anything. It tells the story, which, of course, is exactly what a cinematographer is there to help do. Editor is Fred W. Berger, Academy Award nominee for The Hot Rock. And he also was an editor on TV for MASH and for Dallas. Music by Hans J. Salter. This dude did a ton of horror movie music. The Wolf Man, Creature from the Black Lagoon, Invisible Man Returns, Ghost of Frankenstein, Son of Dracula, House of Frankenstein. But he also did some John Wayne pictures like Pittsburgh and a whole bunch of Westerns and film noirs. So there you go. Talented group of people involved in the film. So let's take a look at this one. We're going to do what I generally do on this channel. And of course, there are going to be spoilers. Now, what I'll do, I'll bring the spoilers up when it starts to really get spoilery. So if you want to just see the setup for the picture, but at a certain point, you want, don't tell me. Okay. Well, we got you okay on this one. So our picture starts off with these two people, Sam Donovan, played by Dennis O'Keefe, and Anita Weatherby, played by Barbara Britton. And they are departing a train, and they're now at a bus depot. They're going to be getting on this bus to go somewhere, and he's helping her with her Christmas packages, which she has very many. She's dropping them, etc. He's helping her out. So the two of them head over to the bus. They are both going to be going to a place called Kleberg. So some little city, who knows where, or little town, really. And you get the first hint of the plot at this point. Specifically, a man named Roger Phillips has committed suicide in Kleberg. And the bus driver does not seem really very sad about it. Okay, so what's that all about? So on the bus, he helps her with her packages and then asks if he could sit down next to her. And you could see how crowded the bus is. So he obviously wants to sit down next to her. And they strike up a conversation and, kind of start hitting it off. He's a nice guy. He's a funny guy. And, there's a little bit of flirtation involved in all that. She's a little bit shy, etc. So at this point, you almost feel like you're heading into sort of a light romantic comedy, except for what the bus driver was talking about, the suicide that happened. That's obviously, it kind of lets you know, this is going to be a little bit more serious a film than it appears. So they make it to town, and Anita's parents are there, and her sister are there to meet them. Well, to meet her. And of course, they meet Sam as well. The father, Stu, is played by Art Baker. These are very friendly people. Well, while you're in town, why don't you, go ahead and stop by the house? Anybody can tell you where it is. And he says, well, I'm here for this investigation into the suicide. And so I'll probably be out of here by tonight, but thank you. I really, really appreciates that. So it turns out he's this insurance investigator. And so while they're putting the packages in the car and all that, you can see Stu's a little bit concerned about his presence in the town. And you can also see that his daughter is a little bit, disturbed as well, but for different reasons. So Donovan heads over to the sheriff's office. Sheriff is Larry Best, and he's played in this film by William Bendix. So in Sam's mind, this is kind of an open shut thing. We're just going to get this dealt with. It's really not a big deal. So he interacts with this very non-talkative deputy. Again, we get a little bit more comedy here. He heads in to talk to, Best. And this is where the film really sort of gets going. You have two people here, Dennis O'Keefe and William Bendix, both skilled at comedy. Bendix is later going to be on The Life of Riley radio show, and they did a couple different versions on early TV, one of which starred Jackie Gleason, and then Bendix took over the role at a certain point. And so these are both guys who can handle comedy, and I'm sure audiences knew that going into it. Of course, Bendix could also do more dramatic pieces. But at this point, you're kind of going, well, it's been sort of light. And then here it turns a bit more serious. And this is kind of where the movie really sort of hooked me. So he starts asking about, okay, well, do we have a coroner's report? Now the coroner, it's holiday time, coroner's out. It'll be about a week before we get that. Okay. Have you filed a report? No, I haven't filed a report yet. And the sheriff keeps on trying to change the subject. He will not stay on the subject of what's happened. So Donovan's getting a little bit, a little bit annoyed, but also a little bit suspicious. Okay. Well, so it was a suicide. A gun was involved. Do we have that? No, gun's missing. Okay. How is that? How could it be missing? Somebody found the body. The body is the one that used the firearm. Shouldn't it be there? Well, it'll turn up. Well, okay, what about the bullet? Well, yeah, that's, we buried the body. The bullet was in it. Okay, so you didn't test? You didn't do anything here. Well, there's no big deal with that. Don't worry about it. We'll get it all figured out. Again, changing the subject. So Donovan gets a little bit tough here, and he says, look, no bullet, no insurance payout, for one thing. But on top of that, we're going to have to dig the body back up. Well, we don't want to do that. Look, I will get a court order if I have to. And as he turns to leave, the sheriff pulls out the bullet and drops it on the desk. He goes, wow, that was really quick that you got that out of the body. So he takes a look at it. Looks like 9mm, maybe a Luger. So as Sam departs, he's going to go talk to the jeweler in town who found the body. As he departs, sheriff asks for the bullet back. We don't want to lose the evidence. So Bendix does a nice job here of really sort of showing this underlying maybe menace. You know, they both do a really nice job in this scene, and that, like I said, that's kind of what hooked me on this one. And so he, gives him the bullet back, and he goes off to this Abby's jewelry. So he heads on in and talks to the sales clerk and says, I'd like to speak to Mr. Abbey. And he gives her his card. And once she finds out who he is, oh, well, he might not be in. She goes back, comes back a couple minutes later, and or a few moments later. And, well, yeah, he must have stepped out. He's not here. Oh. Okay, well, he goes, you know what? I did want to buy a compact while I was here. Okay, well, we have some over here, Bubba. And then as he's starting to leave, he kind of turns around and he sees Mr. Abbey peeking at him through the door. Well, Abbey, seeing that he's been seen, heads in and gives a little excuse. Oh, sorry, I just stepped back in through the back door. So we get a little questioning. Well, there's not really anything to say. I went in and I saw the body. Did you see a gun? No, there was no gun. And so Donovan's like, okay, he's got to be hiding something. So his next visit is to the Undertaker, played by Warden Norton, and you might recognize him. I know not from this shot here. If you watch it, did a lot of John Wayne movies, this guy. Skinny guy, a little bit odd sounding. I guess Wayne was a big fan of his. So he's a little bit more helpful because in talking, he mentions there were no powder burns on the body, which you would expect with something like this. So Donovan realizes there's some kind of a cover-up going on. He thinks this is, in fact, a murder, and he's going to find out what's going on. So we next see Sheriff Best heading into his office, and he goes in and he finds that Donovan is waiting for him. And once again, they're going back and forth, parrying. Donovan discovers that lots of people in this town have Lugers, including the sheriff. And it's been fired recently. And so he's holding the gun. The sheriff shows it to him. And he's saying, well, we need to check into all this. And the sheriff, again, is being evasive. And so he just walks over with the gun to this pile of newspapers and just fires a bullet right into him. Shocks the sheriff, which is kind of one of the things I think he wanted to do. Deputy runs in as well. Digs in the papers, finds the bullet. And so now he has something he can get a ballistic report on. So again, another good scene where we're seeing these two clashing, and I kind of like the way that he handles the sheriff here. Kind of like, A, I'm not screwing around, and B, you don't know exactly what I'm capable of. And so so the sheriff, a little shocked, still trying to play it off a bit, but he's starting to, little by little, Donovan's starting to find some things out. For example, there was a puddle on the floor by the body. Okay, that's interesting. That would suggest there was another person there. It had been raining that night. So Donovan finally says, well, where can I find the beneficiary of the policy? And again, he's evasive. He goes, well, where, it's this woman. Where does she live? With her husband. Well, really, with her husband. Great. Do you have an address by any chance? Well, they're out of town, for a while. So just don't worry about it. Why don't you get to the address? And while he's talking to him, happens to glance out the window and he sees Anita and her father. They'd been doing some shopping, perhaps, and they drive away. And the sheriff is saying, well, why don't you don't worry about this. It's a suicide. It's done. It's over. Why don't you go home? I'm sure you got family. It's Christmas time. He says, honestly, I don't really have a home. I don't have anybody. Home is wherever I happen to be at any given time. But he goes, this is a nice town. Maybe I'm going to stick around for a while. Maybe I found a reason to stick around. Now that could maybe be taken a couple different ways from the sheriff's point of view. I got a mystery to solve for my insurance company. But maybe what he's really thinking is Anita is the reason I need to stick around. So, as he's leaving, but they drive away. So as he's leaving, Best remarks, I think you're going to be no end of trouble. And clearly that's true. So we next see Donovan in his hotel room. And here's the point. Well, we'll put the spoiler sign up now at this point, because I think we got a good setup for what we're dealing with. There's some kind of a cover-up. He's got to get to the bottom of it. So he's in his hotel room, calling back to the home office. He goes, I think we got a murder here. He goes, and that's double indemnity from our place. And he's going, maybe you don't want me to solve it. And his boss is like, no. People find out we're doing double indemnity. We'll sell tons of policies. It doesn't matter. Okay, I'm going to figure it out. So we go now to the Weatherby home, and Anita is sitting by the window, trying to look through a magazine, trying to look very casual, but they've gotten a call that Sam's coming over, and she's clearly very excited about him coming to the house. We meet the housekeeper, Hilda, played by Doro Morand. She's kind of eccentric. She's a pessimist. She's never happy unless she's not happy. And she notes the tension that Anita feels. And Anita's sister is kind of poking fun at her, for how excited she is. She's obviously got a crush on this guy. So Sam finally is walking up to the house and kind of spots this happy little domestic scene, through the window. And, it's obviously spots Anita as well. He's intrigued. He's clearly, he's got a thing for her, and maybe he's reconsidering the life that he's led up to this point. So he's greeted very warmly in the house, and, heads in, and he's talking to her little sister and talking to Stu, and gives Kathy, the younger sister, the compact that he got, as a Christmas present. Steps in and he sits down next to Anita, and we get a little more kind of flirting, and Dad's sort of looking over it, kind of asks, so did you settle the matter? And no, not yet. I'm going to maybe be in town for a few days. And again, he's maybe not thrilled about that. Maybe Stu Weatherby knows a little bit more about this too than he's made apparent. So these two end up going to the movies. There's this really nosy kid who's getting on their nerves. Again, we get a little bit more of the comedy aspect of the film. They really don't get in the way of each other. The comedy is very character driven. It's sort of generated by who the characters are and how they behave. So it doesn't really undercut the plot. We have some nice, decent people, kind of funny, who happen to be dealing with something very, very serious. And so Eventually get back to her house, and we actually get a first kiss between the two of them. So really blossoming. We got love at first sight. And, Donovan's impressed with the small town atmosphere. It's something that he's really missed. And so the next day, Sam visits the beneficiary of the insurance policy, the niece of the man who was killed. Sam is definitely sure he was killed at this point. And it turns out to be Mrs. Olson, Virginia Christine, which on my channel, we last did a movie of her. She was in the last of the Universal original Mummy movies. I think it was The Mummy's Ghost. Geez, I should know better at this point. Mummy's Hand. No, maybe it was Mummy's Hand, Mummy's Ghost, Mummy's Tomb. Mummy's Curse. It was Mummy's Curse. So he tells her he thinks that her uncle was murdered. No, it was suicide. It was definitely suicide. It's not murder. Well, if it was murder, the benefit, it pays twice. I don't want the money. Just leave this alone. Very suspicious. And as he leaves, he says, looks like I'm going to have to prove it to you, too. And after he leaves, this woman, Margaret, her husband enters, a guy named Frank Baker. And they both seem very worried about what's going on and what might be discovered. And there's signs that she's worried that her husband might have killed her uncle because they had argued and fought. And her uncle didn't approve of her getting married. So while Sam is walking into town, Anita drives by and picks him up. And they're chatting. He's going to head now to the home of Roger Phillips to investigate there. And while they're driving, Sam mentions, well, I'm looking for a Luger. Kind of in a flippant way. And she remarks, well, my father'd probably lend you his. Oh, another owner of a Luger. Kind of takes him back. And she obviously has no idea what she's, just said. But he tells her, he goes, well, Phillips was killed by a Luger. And now she's kind of worried too. So we're lining up suspects in this film at this point. So they arrive at the Phillips house, and as they walk up to the door, somebody inside unlocks it. Once they get inside, Sam sees that there are these chalk outlines right by the door where somebody had stood. And the chalk outline of the body, and that's where the puddle was, and also sees where the shell casing fell after, the gun was fired. So he's kind of looking at all this stuff. It's a little dark, and sheriff says, hey, you could probably see better in the light. And he goes, it's illegal to break and enter. Anita says, well, it's my fault. I found that the door was unlocked. He goes, well, I know. I'm the one who unlocked it. I figured you'd be by here eventually. So we still have this pairing going on between Sam and the sheriff. And the sheriff, obviously, having drawn the chalk outlines, knows that it wasn't a suicide. He never obviously thought it was a suicide. So why was he lying about that? What is he trying to accomplish? So Sam reassures Anita, don't worry about the Luger. I'm sure your father is not involved in this. I don't even think he would be. A lot of people have Lugers, including the sheriff. And when she leaves, the sheriff is going, so you still think it might have been me? He goes, no, you're too convenient a suspect. I don't think it's you. And so he finds a few more things out here. On the night of the murder, Margaret was eloping with Frank. And Sam says, well, maybe Frank didn't like the uncle, knew there was an insurance policy. Maybe he did it. And the sheriff's saying, Sam, this is a small town. People start, being suspicious of one another. Things can fall apart really quickly. We got to be careful how we move here. And Sam notes that it seems like the entire town hated Phillips. So almost everybody seems to have at least a motive for having done this. And he says, murder is serious, even in a small town. Either we cooperate or I go about things my own way, and you might be surprised what I find out. So that night, Sam visits once again the Weatherby house. And Kathy greets him, and it's a nice little scene. She's obviously attracted to him as well, but, she's a lot younger. And, she's kind of, well, he's here to see Anita. And so she's trying to act older than she really is and all that kind of, it's a nice scene. It's light. It's funny. Stu arrives home and finds out that this is in fact a murder investigation and that the weapon used was a Luger. And he admits Phillips was not well liked in town. And Anita overhears some of this, whether or not Stu owns a Luger. And he doesn't say anything right away. And she's like, well, yeah, you remember you have one you brought back from the war. Oh, yeah, I do. But he goes, I gave it away a long time ago to Dr. Jerome before he retired and moved to Fairfield. Well, Sam wants to talk to Jerome, and it turns out they're all going to this Christmas tree lighting in the town square. And Jerome is the one who lights the tree every year. So he's going to be there, and you can talk to him when you get there. So he accompanies them, and of course, it's another chance to spend time with Anita. And there's some joking going on between Stu and another guy because of Stu's this old beaver coat that he wears, old fur coat. Well, it's good enough for my father. It's good enough for me. Yeah, that's what your dad used to say too. Just, small town ribbing. And Anita's worried about Sam questioning Dr. Jerome. Why don't you just leave well enough alone? Why do we have to dig into these things? And Sam's like, well, there's a murder. I mean, you got to do something about that. And so at that point, the sheriff arrives and he lets Stu and this other guy know that Dr. Jerome has just passed away. He had a heart attack. Puts a somber mood over the tree lighting. But Stu gives a sort of a eulogy for Dr. Jerome. He is beloved in this town. Half the people in it were delivered by him. He was always there for everybody in sickness or health. He was a wonderful man. We're all going to miss him terribly. We light this in the name of Dr. Paul Jerome. And so, somber moment. They head back home. Sam and Anita have another moment on the front porch. And he says, why don't you want me to question the doctor? He goes, if you're going to go getting suspicious about the men in your life, we're going to have trouble later on. So he's kind of hinting, maybe they have a future together. Well, Anita heads up to her room and she gets her diary and she starts writing in it when Kathy shows up and spying on her. And clearly she's read her diary. Oh, did Sam kiss you again? And they scuffle over the diary. She decides she needs to hide it somewhere better. Well, there's this table right outside her room. And the top of the table swivels. So she figures I'll hide it in there because there's usually like a little potted plant on top of it or something. At least a little vase is up there. So she swivels it open. And she finds the Luger inside. This is a very upsetting discovery for her. Could her father have something to do with this murder? The next morning, the Bakers are in the sheriff's office and Sam is questioning them. And, they kind of sort of have an alibi, but each one of them is each other's alibi. Donovan says, I think you're both lying. I think Frank committed the murder. But Margaret's like, no. When there was an argument, but the sheriff was called. He was still there when Frank and I left. We went right to the bus depot. Phillips was sitting at his desk. He was still alive the last time that we saw him. Okay, so they leave, and Sam says to the sheriff, he goes, we really don't have any solid alibis here. The Bakers were at the depot alone. The Abbeys were home alone. Stu was on a walk alone. And the sheriff goes, well, you remember, I also have a Luger. And it does seem like the two of them are warming up to each other just a little bit. But the sheriff is still doing everything he can to block him. Meanwhile, at home, Anita opens that table back up and takes the Luger out and puts it in her purse. She's going to do something with it. But before she can leave the house, Sam arrives, and she's a little nervous, but he says, "Oh, could you give me a ride into town?" "Sure, that's great." So Sam thinks that Abby might know something. So he needs to go to the jewelry store to question him again. She drives him over, and Sam at one point trying to light a cigarette, doesn't have a match. So he grabs the purse to open it, and she kind of grabs the purse back. And he's kind of like, "Oh, okay." She goes, "I don't have any matches. I don't smoke." All right. But it's a little bit weird. And she's again saying, "Couldn't you just drop the case? Everything's changed since you showed up." I think his mindset is like, look, whether I drop it or not, a murder happened in this town. I would think that you'd want to have that dealt with. But she's just, she's upset. She likes Sam a lot, but she's afraid of what this is doing and afraid that her father's going to be caught up in it. So, at the sheriff's, Frank, now says that, well, Anita's father is my alibi. Okay, so he goes over to talk to the bank, to talk to Stu, and Stu confirms the alibi. And now Sam's like, okay, all right, well, so it's not Frank. It's got to be somebody else. I'd like to go to the doctor's house and inspect the Luger that's in his gun collection, the Luger that belonged to Stu that he gave to the doctor. Well, while he's doing that, Anita has arrived at the doctor's home to replace the Luger in his collection. She wants to throw any suspicion off of her father. And so she puts it on there, but you notice she puts it on backwards, the reverse of all the other guns there. And when she hears Sam arriving, she kind of hides, and you see a reflection of her in the picture that he doesn't notice. And he's looking, he sees the gun, notices to some degree that it's backwards. And so he's like, well, I need to take the gun so he can inspect it, look for fingerprints, what have you, puts it in a handkerchief. And he sits down at the desk to write a note, just to, who he is, and I've taken the gun, and blah, 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 blah. And there's some clues here that are very important to the mystery, which I'm embarrassed to say the first time I watched it, I completely missed. And I think one of the reasons is there's enough character-driven stuff that I wasn't fully engaged on, like, I got to solve this mystery. Because usually I'm pretty good at that stuff, at least in movies and TV shows. So as he leaves with the gun, Anita comes out of hiding. And so they go back to the bank to talk to Stu about the gun. Do you recognize this gun? Yes. But he goes, I really did give it to Jerome. He goes, well, that's where I found it. See, now he thinks, oh, did he find that in the house? People are starting to, again, cast suspicion on themselves in this little mystery. Luger had no fingerprints. It was wiped. It was pinned. It was planted back at the doctor. Sheriff, well, you don't know that it was planted. It might have been there. And he doesn't really want it sent off to Chicago for ballistics testing. He goes, look, man, if we arrest the wrong man, it could really ruin them in this town. We got to be careful. He keeps trying to slow everything down. So Donovan's had about enough. He goes to the newspaper office and he plants a story. It's true, but it's primarily designed to draw the murderer out. He says, we're going to do a test on the carpeting where the murderer stood, where that puddle was. And we're going to take a piece of the carpet, send it off to Chicago, and they're going to be able to test for any kind of fibers that came off the coat into that puddle. And from those, we could figure out the kind of coat that was worn, the color. It gives us an important clue. Okay. So that's now been planted in the newspaper. When Stu gets back home, he looks in the table for his gun, discovers it missing, discovers his daughter's diary, in its place, and he realizes what must have happened. And there's a really nice scene because he realizes she thinks that I did it. And she was trying to protect me. And he says, fathers live their entire lives loving their children and never really knowing for sure if they love us back. And when we find out, it's a really nice thing. It's a nice scene in this movie, despite the fact that it's about a murder investigation, has a lot of that kind of work in it. So he then heads off to pick up his wife, who's downtown shopping. Sam arrives that night. We have a little funny moment with Hilda, kind of messing with her. And he brings in the paper, and she sees the story in the paper. So Sam and Anita talk about the case, and she sees the paper as well. And he can't understand why she's upset about the killer being exposed, because clearly he really doesn't think it would be her father. He's a nice guy. He can't believe that he would do something like that. Kathy upstairs spots Hilda burning something in the yard. And it's that old fur coat. Kathy kind of raises the alarm, and they run down, and she says, well, the coat was dirty. I was trying to clean it with gasoline, and a spark, caught it. And he's like, okay, yeah, that's not true. Well, I got him another coat for Christmas, and I want him to wear it, and so I'm getting rid of that old coat. Sam sees the worry on Anita's face, and he says, okay, clearly these people are actually concerned that Stu might have actually done this. And he tries to reassure her, and he goes, look, believe me, I never thought, and it really looks like the romance is now over. Sam leaves, and Hilda enters, and she finds that Anita has thrown the paper in the fireplace. She doesn't want her father getting nervous, and showing up and revealing that he was the killer. And we see the sheriff reading the paper. We see the Abbeys reading the paper. We see the Bakers reading the paper. All the pieces are now in play. So now we're in the end game. Sam is sitting in the dark in the house, the Phillips house. The sheriff arrives, sort of announces himself. I know you're here in the dark. I don't want to get shot, so it's just me. Sits down talking with him. Why do you want to go around making people unhappy? And he goes, hey, maybe I am the one who did it. He goes, nothing you can do about it. He goes, I'm sure you're armed, but you can't. He goes, if you shoot me first, it'll be a case of murder. If you miss and I shoot you, just means a lot more votes, come November. A little bit of a tense scene at that point. We flip back to the Weatherby house. Stu can't find the paper. He's annoyed. Anita's distracted and worried. Stu's wife, unfortunately, mentions what she saw in the paper. So Stu says, well, I'm going to go out and get a paper. Okay, well, don't be long. He can't find his coat. And Hilda lets him know what happened. So he now knows they all think I did it. And they're all trying to protect me. And it's still, he's touched. Anita begs her, don't go. He says, he goes, look, I know this is a trap, but the truth has to come out sometime. So he drives away, and she kind of runs out, and she decides she's going to follow. Back to the Phillips place. Sam and Best have not shot each other at this point. Best tells him this little story to maybe help him see things in a different light. He goes, I investigated a very similar case some years back. A guy who was a real monster, terrorized the town, hurt everybody in it. And there was another man, the opposite. And he watched this man destroying people until he couldn't stand it any longer. And he took matters into his own hands. And at this moment, they hear a car pull up. Door opens, flashlight on, and it's Stu. And Sam says, oh, he goes, you don't know how much I prayed it wasn't you, but let me explain. He goes, you don't need to explain. So he starts describing how this was done. Killer came in the door, stood where those footprints are, pulled his gun, and shot. And then he notices that pillar right there, if you're standing in that spot, is in the way. And he goes, the killer was left-handed. And that's where he suddenly realizes everything on Dr. Giroux's desk was for a left-handed person. There's a picture of him as a pitcher. There's a picture of these guys holding guns like at the gun club. Everything's pointing to the fact he was a lefty. And that's what I didn't pick it up the first time. I really should have. It's not the most subtle clue dropping in the world. But so he's actually kind of like, he's ecstatic. He's like, it wasn't you. I didn't want it to be you. It was Dr. Giroux. And so they explained to him, yes, it was Dr. Giroux. The sheriff had figured it out already. Sam actually was there. Stu was actually there. He came in. He saw the doctor standing over the body. He said, there's nothing I could do to help Phillips at that point. He goes, I told him to get out of there and just keep it quiet until after Christmas. And Anita arrives, worried about her father. He goes, it's okay. It's not him. And, Stu had said, does everybody have to know about this? I mean, Giroux loved this town. He couldn't stand to see what Phillips was doing to it. And he's gone. He's beyond justice at this point anyways. So Anita, like I said, arrives. And he says, it's okay. It turns out I'm a lousy detective. It was a suicide all along. It wasn't a murder. So he decides to join the cover-up because what's the point of anything else at this point? Let's just let this one drop. And as they walk out, you kind of hear the strains of "O Come All You Faithful." Best wishes to a Merry Christmas. And now the cover-up's complete. Okay. So let's take down the slideshow, take down the spoiler alert. So there we have it, folks. Cover Up. It is not like a blockbuster film. It's not like a cult classic exactly. It's a nice little film. You got the murder mystery aspect of it. You got light comedy, and the light little bits of comedy work. You got the romance. There's some nice little touching scenes. It's a really nice movie and very much worth watching. It's, not a super long film or anything like that. So I was amazed at how much I liked it and, having known nothing about it when I started it. And I really liked the way that they managed to weave together the more serious and the more comedic aspects of the story together. It just has a really good tone throughout. Well acted. Everybody's good in it, really. There's no weak performances. Just a great little film. And so, Christmas adjacent film. Christmas with a little murder mystery in it. So maybe worth watching this month, and if not this month, then maybe later. So there you go. Cover Up. I'd give it like a solid B. It's a good picture. Let me know what you think in the comments. Is this a movie you've seen or you have any questions about it? I'll answer them if I can, and I'll try to avoid any spoilers if that's the case. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, share with a friend. Until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun. Give Cover Up a chance. And I will hopefully see you again soon. Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.